Texts 1 and 2. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Viduruvacha Antarhite Bhagavati Brahmaloka Pitamaha Prajasasarga Katida Daihikir Manasir Vibhu Viduruvacha Antarhite Bhagavati Brahmaloka Pitamaha Prajasasarga Katidha Daihikir Manasir Vibhu Antarhite Bhagavati Brahmaloka Pitamaha Prajasasarga Katidha Daihikir Manasir Vibhu. Please chant.
Antarhite Bhagavati Brahmaloka Pitamaha Prajasasarga Katidha Daihikir Manasir Vibhu
Antarhite Bhagavati Brahmaloka Pitamaha Prajasasarga Katida Daihikir Manasir Vibhu
Antarhite Bhagavati Brahmaloka Pitamaha Prajasasarga Katida Daihikir Manasir Vibhu
Antarhite Bhagavati
Brahmaloka Pitamaha
Prajasasarga Katida Daihikir Manasir Vibhu
Tarita Bhagavati Brahmaloka Pitamaha Radhesa Katida Daihikir Manasir Vibhu.
Viduruvacha Shri Vidura said Antarhite after the disappearance Bhagavati of the personality of Godhead Brahma the first created being Loka Pitamaha the grandfather of all planetary inhabitants Praja generations Sasarja created Katidha how many Daihiki from his body Manasi from his mind Vibhu the great Shri Vidura said O great sage, Please let me know how Brahma, the grandfather of the planetary inhabitants, created the bodies of the living entities from his own body and mind after the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-shalakya Chakshurumilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. We'll read another verse, but I'm just looking at this one. I thought I would, before we go on, I'm gonna have some water. Yep, tastes like Krishna. This history of Vidura speaking with Maitreya was touched on in the first canto of Srimad Bhagawatam. I think it was 13th chapter. And I'm not just remembering that from past knowledge, I looked it up this morning. But yeah, I think it was the 13th chapter. And then at the end of the second chapter, it was revisited. The sages of Naimisharanya were asking Sutta Goswami, they heard something about Vidura leaving home. And they said, okay, he went on pilgrimage, and then what did he do? We want to hear more about the pure devotees of the Lord. And so in the beginning of the third canto, where we are now, we got to hear a little bit more about Vidura and his travels. And it took 4 chapters before he reaches Maitreya, because first he encounters Uddhava, and he hears a bunch from Uddhava, and specifically about Krishna's departure. And then we had that really touching verse where he hears that Krishna thought about him before his departure. He cries out very loudly. And so this is not an ordinary questions and answers session. Maitreya Muni was directly present when Shukadeva Goswami was speaking. He was one of the prominent sages. And Vidura, as we know, well, it was just mentioned not too long ago in a previous chapter by Maitreya himself. He was telling Vidura, you're Yamaraj himself. You were cursed because you judged the childish activities of a boy piercing a cricket, some sort of insect. And so you punished him to be pierced similarly, and so he cursed you. And Bhagavatam doesn't touch much on the birth of Vidura. It briefly summarizes it, but I really like this pastime because it's quite interesting also that Vidura and Shukadeva Goswami are half-brothers. They both share the same father. Vyasa, Ved Vyas, is the father of Vidura. And he is a great rishi and therefore has no awareness of his external presentation. Vyasadeva doesn't care what he looks like. He's not in front of a mirror combing out his dreadlocks and washing his face nicely. He looked quite scary. And so when he was called upon to create progeny in the wives of his brother? Yeah. He first approached Ambika and Ambalika, and one of them was so afraid that she covered her eyes, and Dhritarashtra was born blind. The other was so afraid that she turned pale white, and therefore Pandu was born very white. And then the maidservant, who, I don't know what her exact name is, but she's referred to as Parishrami. If we remember the Pavarga material existence talked about in terms of the Sanskrit Pavarga, Papavapama, that Pa stands for Parishrama, which means very hard work. So she's a maidservant, and they call her Parishrami, according to her position. So she was presented before Vyasadeva in the place of, I think, Ambalika, who didn't want to see Vyasadeva again. She was so afraid she put forward her maidservant. And the maidservant was completely calm, completely composed. It's quite amazing the difference between the maidservant and the two queens. And from this union we get the great soul Vidura, who is the son of Vyasadeva, a very powerful personality. And so he's, by good fortune, by providence, was offended by Duryodhana, or rather Duryodhana committed the offense, and Vidura took it as an opportunity to exit his royal duties. And in his travels he visited many holy places, came upon Uddhava, and then starting from the 5th chapter of the 3rd canto, so now we're just entering the 10th chapter, we've already heard 4 chapters of his discussions with Maitreya Muni. And I think Burijan Prabhu's book is probably a good resource if you want sort of a nice breakdown, Unveiling the Lotus Feet. I didn't look at it, but as I was looking over these verses, I feel like I would have probably benefited from it, because he probably would have explained where some of these questions and answers are taking place. Because I looked back at the 7th chapter of the 3rd canto, and Vidura asks a bunch of questions, and Maitreya sort of summarily discusses a couple of them, and then he goes into this long discourse about Lord Brahma. And I'm not exactly sure where that stems from, why he went so deeply into depth on Lord Brahma. I mean, it's answering one of the questions, but it's just interesting how these questions and answers take place in the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's actually something that's always been interesting to me from when I was very little, because I remember sitting in Bhagavatam classes, and the question would be something like, can you describe anger? Or, something like really sort of broad, not a very specific question. And then the answer, not only is the answer elaborate, but the speaker feels all enlivened from the question and answers very nicely with reference to various pastimes and devotees who experienced anger. So it's sort of these broad questions and answers. And I've noticed that with our questions and answers, it's usually something far more specific, because I'm not sure if that's just what our Kali Yuga brains have capacity for, or we don't understand the deeper subjects at hand. But we're about to hear another such question anyway, I'll leave it for whoever's class that is. But Vidura asks, can you tell me more about eternal time? And it just seems like such a broad question. Can you hear more? If you asked one of our senior members, can you please tell me more about eternal time? They might mention a couple of things, but Maitreya really dives into it and is all excited to speak about it. So, just sort of nice to reset our groundings, because it's a brand new chapter, sort of, because Bhagavatam sort of jumps all over the place with who the speakers are and what the setting is. It's nice to sort of have that context that for the past 5 chapters, now going on 5 chapters, we're hearing the questions and answers between Vidura and Maitreya. And they're going to go on for a while. So Sri Vidura said, "O great sage, please let me know how Brahma, the grandfather of the planetary, how the Lord Brahma, the grandfather of the planetary inhabitants, created the bodies of the living entities from his own body and mind after the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead." The word disappearance, antarhite, entering within, antar, is sort of an interesting concept, the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because it's not like the disappearance of, when you burn a piece of paper and it disappears. You can't get that back. That paper is, it's still present in a transformation of material elements, but the paper is gone. But when the Supreme Lord disappears, it's sort of just an unmanifestation from our vision. He disappeared to Brahma, but he's still present in everything. He's present in every atom. When Dhruva Maharaj finally got the darshan, when the Lord disappeared, or actually more prominently, Narada Muni, as the maidservant's son, he finally gets the darshan, and when the Lord disappears, he's frantically trying to find him again. Oh, how can I get this vision back? And so it's sort of an interesting word here, Antarhite Bhagavati, that the Supreme Lord has disappeared from Brahma's vision, but he's empowered Lord Brahma. He's told him one more round of tapasya, another 100 years, and then you can begin this creation using the elements from the lotus flower on which you're born. And Brahma is referred to as Loka Pitamaha. So Vidura is saying, how did he create these Daihikir, Manasir Vibhu? How did this great personality from his mind create all of these bodies? And he's appropriately referring to him as Loka Pitamaha. He's the grandfather of all planetary inhabitants. Pitamaha. When Maruti, my son, was born, we were coming up with different names for different people in the family. And because a small child isn't going to refer to his parents and grandparents by their first names, usually there's some affectionate name. Just like I've called my grandma Lolium, I've called her Lolly my whole life. So when it came to my father, what should his name be for Maruti? He said, oh, Pitamaha. So he became grandfather in Sanskrit, Pitamaha. So this is Lord Brahma's position. He's grandfather of all the living inhabitants. At this point, great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. But for some of the original created beings, grandfather. Like Manu. Or Manu is a direct son. Who's Dhruva's dad? King Uttanapada. For King Uttanapada, he's directly grandfather. Second verse. Ye chame bhagavan prashtas, tvayarta bhagavittama, tan vadasvana purvyena, chindhi na sarva samshayam. O greatly learned one, kindly eradicate all my doubts, and let me know all that I've inquired from you, from the beginning to the end. Anupurvyena, by starting from the beginning, and therefore implied all the way up until the end. Anupurvyena, from Purvya, from before, from purport. Vidura asked all the relevant questions of Maitreya because he knew well that Maitreya was the right person to reply to all the points of his inquiries. One must be confident about the qualifications of his teacher. One should not approach a layman for replies to specific spiritual inquiries. Such inquiries, when replied to with imaginative answers by the teacher, are a program for wasting time. Tadvidhi pranipadena pariprashnena seva upadekshanti te jnaninas tattvadarshana. It's the proper system for receiving knowledge, pranipad, pariprashan, seva. One becomes qualified to ask questions by performing devotional service. There's a system when one approaches the spiritual master, one performs service, and then one has the right to probably wasn't necessary, but somehow that wire dangling down bothered my vision. One gets the right to ask questions, first by performing service, not just the right from the spiritual master's point of view, but from a place of submission, from a place of a desire to understand more. So the qualifications of the speaker and the recipient of knowledge are again being stressed here. That Vidura is proper person to ask questions, Prabhupada mentions, he asks all relevant questions. What's a relevant question? Iti samprashna samkrishto bhavadbhir lokamangala. Is that how it begins? Iti samprashna. Iti samprashna samkrishto. That does mean perfect inquiries, and he's fully satisfied by perfect questions. But I'm looking for the other one. Bhavadbhir lokamangala. What would we do without our phones? Munaya sadhu prashtoham bhavadbhir lokamangala yadkrita krishna samprashno yenatma suprasidati. O sages, this is Sutta Goswami speaking to Shaunaka Muni and all the sages. I have been justly questioned by you. Your questions are worthy because they relate to Lord Krishna and so are of relevance to the world's welfare. Only questions of this sort are capable of completely satisfying the self. This is one of those, His Grace Vaisheshika Prabhu says that we should memorize the second chapter of the first canto. So this is one of those preliminary verses in that second chapter, the 5th verse. And he's glorifying the sages. Mune sadhu prashtoham. Your questions are sadhu, very, very good. Sometimes in English we hear bravo, bravo. In Sanskrit it's sadhu, sadhu. Devotees are referred to as sadhus. Good questions are referred to as sadhu. All good things are sadhu. So Munaya sadhu prashtoham bhavadbhir lokamangala. Why are they sadhu? Because they're mangala, they're very auspicious. For just you and me? No, share it with everyone. Such questions that are so beneficial that directly relate to Krishna are beneficial not just for the speaker and hearer, but for the entire world. Sound travels 7 times around the world. This constant purifying effect. Yadkrita Krishna samprashna, because it's directly referring to Krishna. Yenatma suprasidati. Maharaj pointed out a couple days ago how interesting this word Atma is. We keep, especially in the past few days, we've had a lot of verses with a lot of Atmas going on. Aham Atma Atmanam Dhata. Maharaj gave that class. Krishna is the Atma of the Atma. And then in various, contextually, Atma means different things. And I remember a decade ago now hearing a class by Prabhupada on this verse, Munaya sadhu prashtoham, that the Yenatma suprasidati, this Atma means not just, oh actually no, it wasn't this one, it was the next one. Yayatma suprasidati. It was Savaipum Sam Parodharmo, Yato Bhaktir Bhokshide, Ahaitukya Pratyata, Yayatma suprasidati. That unmotivated and uninterrupted devotional service is fully satisfying for the self, for the Atma. So these 2 verses in a row, one is Yenatma suprasidati, the next one is Yayatma suprasidati. But the effect is the same. So questions relating to Krishna are fully satisfying for the soul, and unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service is fully satisfying for the soul. So we understand that on a profound level. But in this class Prabhupada was giving on Vasudevi Bhagavati, no, not, so on Savaipam Santaro Dharma. It's so wonderful. Even when you get a verse wrong, remembering verses is so wonderful. It just feels uplifting. You know, if you remember wrong lines in some Shakespeare book, it's just frustrating. But when you remember the wrong verse in Bhagavatam, it's like you just want to start talking about that verse now. So Prabhupada was pointing out that yes, on a profound level, it's fully satisfying for the soul residing within. But he said Atma also refers to the mind, the body, and the senses. And so Prabhupada was making the point that not only for the soul, but even for the mind, body, and senses, it's fully satisfying. If it weren't, then the senses would still be hankering for something else. But that's the whole point in Bhagavad Gita of having achieved a higher taste, one can easily give up the lower. What's the key line? What's that? Param Drishva Nivartana, yeah. So having witnessed Param Drishva, this higher vision, this higher taste, Nivartate, one can easily give up the lower taste. So the senses and the mind and the body, everything becomes pacified when engaged in devotional service, because who would ever want to go back to eating a cricket lollipop after you've had prasadam? I mention that because I remember being a kid in Kahala Mall. I went into that candy shop, and in the back of the candy shop, right in front of the register, there's all these lollipops, and some had scorpions in them, some had cockroaches in them, some had, just like horrific things. And someone, whether it's by novelty or whether it's by actual desire, someone picks these up, buys it, and puts it in their mouth. And this is just a sign of geez, there's a lot of words that can describe it. We have a very colorful language that allows, actually in Sanskrit there's a whole class of words for to harm, to kill. It's quite a, you learn a lot about a language by what it's able to describe. Someone told me that in one of the Asian languages there's no direct word for God. It's a very vague, impersonal sort of concept. And it's quite amazing what you can describe with a language. Shows each language also is in a certain mode of material nature. Sanskrit, just in itself, take away spirituality, just the language itself is in the mode of goodness. One can rise to a higher platform of consciousness just by speaking the language. It's quite wonderful. English kind of like, it's kind of like that, it's like whatever you make of it, You can talk English in this sort of modern, ignorant way and degrade one's consciousness. Texting language, text talk. It's just sort of like the fastest, most convenient way. BRB, LOL. It's sort of dumbing down everyone's consciousness. If you sort of rewind time, even to the early 1900s, indubitably, there's all these words that people say that sort of are more profound. But we won't give a language class now. It's just a thought on this word, Atma, Yayatma Suprasidati, or Yenatma Suprasidati, that such questions are beneficial for the whole world because they directly relate to Krishna and therefore are fully satisfying for the self. And this means that one's mind becomes pacified. To be satisfied is the austerity of the mind. Anyway, to be satisfied is the austerity of the mind. Another verse in Gita. And the mind can't be satisfied if it's constantly running after some external gratification. But by relating everything to Krishna, then the mind is completely satisfied. That austerity becomes a joy. All austerities become a joy when related to Krishna consciousness. So, proper questions and answers are enlivening not only for the speaker and the questioner, but for the entire world, because it relates to Krishna. And now we are all benefiting from these topics explained by Maitreya to Vidura. Chindhi na sarva samshaya. I want all of my samshayas to be completely chindi, to be completely cut to pieces, removed. We hear in the Prahlad Maharaj pastime when all the demons are dancing around Prahlad in the boiling pot of oil, or maybe I think it's in that same instance. But anyway, they're all chindi, chindi. Where is that chindi cut him into pieces? What is that from, Shri? Chindi. Is that from a puppet play, or is it from?
It's in the Srimad Kavacha and right in the Kavacha.
No, but because when we were kids, we all all Guru Coolies sort of know this little chant, chindi, bindi, cut him into pieces.
Yeah.
Is it a play? Or an audio tape, or one of these things. But
Ravijay Bharat when they're
secular kids have Barney and Power Rangers. We have Chindi, Bindi, cut him into pieces. Yeah,
Krishna saves you every time. That's way better than Power Rangers.
yeah, but I don't remember ever being disturbed by, like, even, I see it with Madhuti also, you know, some of these more violent pastimes, I suddenly become worried, oh, what's he gonna think? And then he's totally stoked on it. Yeah, Krishna! Jai, Jai, Jagannath, Ladies. Prabhupada, Islam. This worry that will be somehow scarred or disturbed by certain images is a very materially motivated conception based on repeated traumas in this material world. What's to be understood is that everything in relation to Krishna is supremely transcendental. Not that, you know, a little kid should get graphic descriptions of blood dripping out of Durga's mouth as she's tossing heads around in Jud Bharat's room. But the pastimes of Krishna killing the demons or Prahlad being rescued by Nrsimhadev are very appropriate even for a young child. And we understand that in devotional life because we understand the context of service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But here, Chindhi na sarva samukshaya. Please cut to pieces all of my samukshaya. Arjuna asked the same thing of Krishna. I'm a little off my game today. I had a very long work day yesterday, and then this morning I couldn't wake up. There was a disciples meeting on the last Saturday of each month for my Guru Maharaj's disciple group, and I missed that too. And I was really sad about it, but I'll hear the recording.
You're talking about Rishis, Vyasadeva.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the verse in Gita where Arjuna tells Krishna a similar thing, that you've cut all my doubts to pieces. All of my samshaya are gone. Yeah, possibly. But yeah, do I have it on a sticker here? No. Alright. Yeah, so Chindi Yatra na samshaya, that you've cut all of my doubts to pieces. And this is the effect. Actually, thank you, Che. That was really nice though, hearing that you were listening about the rishis and Vyasadeva. It's very nice when we get reciprocation that people are listening. Adidev Prabhu pointed out the other day that at the end of class, when there are questions or comments, it reflects that someone is deeply considering the topics at hand and has some reflection. So it's nice that the rishis and Vyasadeva stuck with you. Vyasadeva is quite Veda Vyas, the literary incarnation of Krishna. It's by his mercy that we have this seat, that we have Srimad Bhagawatam, the original illuminator, Vyasadeva. When my spiritual master asked Prabhupada, he said that we get this verse in Gita, the second verse of the 4th chapter, Evam Parampara Praptam Imam Rajarshayo Vidu Sakale Nehamata Yogo Nashta Parantapa, that this knowledge is completely lost. After time in this disciplic succession, somewhere it was broken and this knowledge was lost. My spiritual master asked Prabhupada, but Vyasadeva was present, so how could it be lost? There was someone who was present that knew it. And Prabhupada's response was generally not known. It wasn't available to the masses. It was generally unknown. But there are a select few who had special mercy to know, and it was their duty, and they executed it nicely in sharing it again, and recreating a research. The same thing with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He also worked very diligently to bring the topics of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the philosophy back. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, same thing, he sent out the Goswamis to excavate the holy places. So there's this constant sort of wave, this dynamic of a decline in religion, a resurgence, a decline. It's the devotees keep trying to bring the consciousness up, keep trying to lift it up. And so, thank you, Che. But yeah, so Chindi Yatra Nasamshaya, the Vidura is saying, you've cut all of my Chindi na sarva samshaya, sorry, misquoted. Kindly eradicate all my doubts and answer me from the beginning to the end. Any comments or questions? I know these verses they may seem slim sometimes. You know, when you see a verse that has no purport, you think, oh, okay, there's not much to say there. But if one understands a single word from a single verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, if one truly understands a single syllable of a single word from an obscure verse in Srimad Bhagavatam, then one's fully enlightened. It's sort of that Buddhist koan sort of thing, you know, you sit there and meditate on a very simple phrase, and after 10 years, oh, enlightenment. It's kind of like that, but more personal, in that Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna himself, every piece of Bhagavatam. When we hear the Atma Rama verse explained by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Chaitanya Charitamrita, first he explains it in just several ways, and then he explains it in 64 or some insane amount of ways. He breaks it apart, and you can twist each little syllable and get profound meaning. So,
Radhesa, it's really Prabhupada on the note of languages and different modes. Prabhupada said that English was for horses, German was for dogs. I forget what it was. He made Spanish was for lovers. I forget what. Do you remember
Offering to
that?
God. French is for lovers, or French for
Prabhupada might have said
romances.
Prabhupada might have said it a different way. I've heard
I know the
what you were saying.
Spanish was- yeah, I've heard it two different ways.
Oh.
The Spanish told me one way,
Oh.
and but so it confuses me when
Oh,
you
yeah.
start to hear it more than one way. But he did speak of it, that the languages were.
Yeah, even in secular society, we have the one my sister was pointing out. German is for dogs, French is for lovers, Spanish is for God. You know, we have this sort of
The
understanding.
Spanish told me that one for God.
And
Yeah.
and even there was some comedian who he was explaining. You know, my friend came over to my house and my mom shouted, it was some Arabic language. And he said the friend got all scared, and he came and said, my mother would like to know if you'd like a PB and jelly sandwich. So it's sort of this, you know, language can sound very different from its reality. Or Portuguese, you know, it's very passionate, right? People are all like yelling at each other and speaking loudly. My mom said she went with Vrindavan to Brazil, and she thought like, oh, they're getting mad at each other, you know? And it's like, no, we're talking about football, or, you know, something where it's just, we're all excited about it, but it sounds different than it is. But Sanskrit is just the best.
So Chindi, what was it? Was the word for doubt?
Samshaya, Chindi na sarva samshaya.
Yeah, I don't know which verse it is, but asamoha also, so asamoha means free from doubt and delusion. That's something that devotees are, right? When we are, so when Krishna cuts all doubt, he's cutting it with knowledge. Is that what? Sorry, I missed. That he's cutting it with his knowledge, or what was he cutting it with?
How is Maitreya chopping up all of Vidura's samshaya?
Yeah.
By answering his questions. He says, I'm approaching you with questions, you're giving me answers, and it's destroying my doubts. Moha means like Brahma vimohan lila. Sammoha means complete delusion, bewilderment. So, not quite doubts, it's more, I'm totally bewildered. Asamoha means no longer bewildered.
But that's an incredible thing, because you know, there's like a Dante thing, like, what would you do if you had no fear? And it's just like, when you have Krishna, and when you really understand that Krishna has your back at all times, you can live life like that. You can live life without fear, without all this stuff, without doubt, without delusion. but it is important for hearing and listening and reading because, anyone, like Kusha was telling me about her mother and you know, what you have to deal with at the time of death or watching someone slowly leaving their body. And Krishna, once again, he shows us like repeatedly, like, you know, do you really want to live in this material world, all this kind of stuff? You can choose this, or you can choose Krishna. You know, if you want to be attached all the time to material things, it's not going to be as good as being attached to our spiritual things.
Yeah, this concept, this concept of fear seeing something separate from Krishna becomes particularly prominent in the departure of the soul from the body, because it is a very difficult, materially speaking, difficult situation to endure. And at that time, to remember Krishna is almost impossible unless one's made a practice of it. You know, sometimes people say, oh, I just have to remember Krishna at the time of death. 8th chapter Gita, remembering Krishna, I go to Krishna, okay, I'll just remember Krishna when I die and do whatever I want during life. No, it doesn't work like that. When you're on that deathbed and suddenly all these things are gripping you, you're wondering, oh, what did I do with my life? What's my next, what's happening? Is Krishna real? It's this frantic situation where suddenly you doubt everything. But if your whole life you've practiced this, then it's very peaceful, because you don't see something separate from Krishna. And the same thing I was asking Nam yesterday about book distribution. We're thinking about, as COVID reaches an end, anyway, who knows when the end will be. But as book distribution opportunities present themselves, even on Harinam Saturdays, I was thinking I would like to engage in that service more, but I have a lot of fear of rejection. I did 2 months Gita Jayanti marathon in India, and it was a little easier in India. People all know about Krishna, they all know about Gita, and I was all enthused. And even there were difficult days, where I'd come back with my book bag and I thought I'd distribute more, and I didn't do that many, and I was kind of sad with the results. And but I was enthused that when I came back to America, Pushkar Prabhu gave me a Bhagavad Gita to read on the plane. And as I flew into Los Angeles to visit my father, I thought, let me distribute this one Gita in the airport. And I just had one book. All I wanted to do was get one Gita out before my father picked me up. And person after person rejected me. And by like the 15th person, I sort of with my tail between my legs, hid the Gita and snuck outside so no one that I had already approached would see me. And it was painful, the rejection. And then I did a few months in Santa Cruz when I was living with my father again up north. And I would jump on the bus with a bunch of books that I got from Vaisheshika Prabhu's Silicon Valley Temple. And I would go and every day I'd distribute. And the rejections, the fear of that never became less. It was always sort of like a painful thing, but the successes were very beautiful. And then Nam mentioned something to me that I may have heard before, but it was refreshing to hear, is that it's not how many you get out, it's each person you approach that Krishna notices. And somehow Krishna consciousness always has that way of flipping it on you. It's not result oriented, it's remembering Krishna. It's having someone else remember Krishna. Just touch a book. Just hear the name Krishna. Just see you walking down the street in a dhoti and tilak and holding books. All of these little things, it's like that perfection for the senses to see the devotee. The Ambarish as an exemplar of the 9 processes of devotional service, it says, that touching the bodies of the devotees is so beneficial. Touching, seeing, remembering, all of these things. Krishna consciousness just has a way of flipping it. That fear is really seeing something separate from Krishna. And so that fear of rejection means that I'm not thinking about Krishna, I'm thinking about, oh, are people going to accept me? And that's fearful. Or death, is what's happening after, the unknown. It has nothing to do with Krishna, it just has to do with where am I going? How am I going to enjoy it? My senses are finished, this body is finished, this is all I know. This body is everything.
next.
Yeah.
Rameshwar used to give great Sankirtan classes. And I remember him saying that when you're on Sankirtan, and you're approaching someone, that Krishna is saying, at last, here comes my devotee.
That's
Oh,
right.
that's
Yeah.
Wow, that hits hard. Yeah, Paramatma from within the hearts of all these jivas. At last, here comes my devotee. Another chance for people to turn towards Krishna. So it's something very special. Krishna consciousness always takes every doubt we have, every samshaya we have, and just chops it up to pieces, and one gets revitalized, renourished. And even the rejections are wonderful, even from a humility perspective. Imagine if you just went out and you were just slinging books left and right. Would you come back feeling more Krishna conscious, or would you come back with a little chip on your shoulder? A little something like, wow, if Narada Muni came here, he might see that I am the best devotee. You know, it's sort of, instead of passing the buck, one might really feel like, I'm really something. So it's also nice, while we need to be tested, to have those rejections. You know, someone like Prahlad Maharaj, Krishna finally said, I mentioned this last class, but it still blows, it's amazing. He says, I order you to go and enjoy all the opulences of the Daityas. And that's a powerful command. Anyone else told, go and enjoy all these opulences, you'd be like, hell yeah! Woo! I made it! I got a Lamborghini, I got a mansion. But Prahlad Maharaj, he's like almost crying. He's like, no, I just want you, Krishna. It's like a setback. So this, you know, these feelings of success, you know, if you distributed all these books, a real humble devotee who doesn't need to be tested, Krishna can't let that happen. Throw out thousands of books, and he's not going to come back feeling he's better than anyone else. He's going to come back feeling humble.
Krishna told his friends, the cowherd boys, when he sent them out to beg from the Brahmanas, and they came back with nothing. He said, a beggar cannot be attached to the results, so don't be disappointed.
Oh, that's one of the best pastimes. Yeah, the cowherd boys. Oh, I'm sorry, we couldn't bring you anything. And it was Krishna's mercy on those brahmanas. Their wives were so surrendered. Jai Gopal, you had a hand up earlier.
Oh, it was just a simple question. Does anybody know who Sukadeva Goswami's mother is?
Devotee trivia. Shukadev's mother for 500. Yeah.
A great soul.
Great. Yeah, I know. You know, pregnancy is a very uncomfortable situation. I know my mother wanted pressure. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Important pregnancy.
Yeah, she carried him for a while. Of course, I'm sure she wasn't feeling distress from it. They were communicating. Okay, it's time. No! There's Maya out there. I'm safe. It's quite amazing. That's really something. 16 years old, still in the womb. You know, it's like a 4 Kumara trick, but on another level. You know, they said, we don't want to be in Maya, so don't let us cross the age of 5. Shukadeva Goswami says, I don't want to be in Maya, let me not cross the fetus boundary. Because we have in Bhagawatam fetus uvacha, and the child within the womb is saying, oh Krishna, you know, when I go out there, I'll be lost, please protect me, please let me remember you. And then the traumas of birth, you know, forget everything, right back in it. So yeah, we have such an opportunity to learn from Vidura, to learn from Maitreya Muni. Vidura is Yamaraj himself. While he's missing from his post, Aryama is taking control. I don't know who's more merciful. When's a better time to die, when you meet Aryama or Yamaraj? But yeah, Yamaraj, one of the 11 Mahajans described, is such a great devotee, and he's taking this role as Vidura, a very humble role, and we get to learn so much from it. So thank you all for sitting through this Bhagavatam class. and asking relevant questions and comments that relate to Krishna, because that's fully satisfying for the self. And now prasadam is also fully satisfying for the self. And by tasting prasad, then one doesn't want cricket lollipops. So stick with puris, stick with Balashapaka. What are Shukta Shakali Bhaji, Nalita Kushmanda? Stick with all these wonderful Bhogarti preps, and then you'll never desire the vile things of this world.